"Yeah, hi, Jimmy," I said, trying to sound like a man who rented bulldozers every Tuesday. "I need to rent a bulldozer. Smallest one you've got that can still, nudge things decisively." There was a pause. Then Jimmy chuckled. A sound like rocks in a cement mixer. "Nudge things, huh? What kind of things we talking about, buddy? Not like, say, an illegally parked car belonging to your mother-in-law, are we?" "Oh, nothing like that," I said, aiming for breezy. "Just some stubborn landscaping, overgrown roots, definitely not prize-winning petunias, or any kind of decorative, yet highly infuriating chain around a storm shelter." Jimmy laughed out loud this time. "Right. Look, as long as you got a valid driver's license, a regular one will do for the little guys, and a credit card that doesn't scream, 'Impulse decision I'll regret Monday morning.' I can have a Caterpillar D3K compact model out to you this afternoon. 6 months. That's how long I'd been in Mayberry Heights. Traded the city's relentless honking and the apartment neighbor who practiced arias at 3 a.m. for, well, a different kind of symphony, apparently. One played on the minor keys of passive aggression and the discordant brass of bylaw violations. I'd wanted quiet, a yard big enough for a grill and maybe a dog eventually. What I got was a welcome packet thicker than a VCR manual, outlining rules for everything from the precise shade of beige your mailbox could be to the legally mandated cheerfulness of your holiday decorations. Christmas lights in January? That's a paddlin', or at least a sternly worded letter in Comic Sans. I met Carol on day 2. She wasn't holding a paddle, but a clipboard, which in the HOA world is arguably more dangerous. She had this helmet of meticulously sprayed hair, a gaze that could curdle milk, and a look that suggested her preferred hobby was finding joy in the tiny miseries of others. "Mr. Henderson," she'd chirped, though it sounded more like a rusty hinge. "Mike, please." "Your recycling receptacle," she announced, tapping her pen on the clipboard like a judge about to pass sentence, "is approximately 3.5 inches too proximate to the curb line. Bylaw 4, subsection G, paragraph 11. I glanced at the bin. It looked fine. I glanced at her. She did not. "Ah," I said. "My apologies. Curb proximate infractions are a serious business." She didn't crack a smile. Of course she didn't. I just smiled my best, harmless new guy smile, nodded like a bobblehead, and dutifully nudged the bin back what I guessed was 3.5 inches. Figured that was that. Appease the local potentate. Blend into the beige. Oh, naive, sweet summer child Mike. You had no idea. Then came the storm shelter. Living in this part of the country, you get a little jumpy when the sky turns that particular shade of bruised green, and the tornado sirens start their mournful wail. It's like nature's way of saying, "Hey, remember all those flimsy wooden houses you people like to build? Funny, right?" So I decided to invest. Top of the line. Reinforced steel, poured concrete, a door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. My little bunker of bliss, my subterranean sanctuary. The installation took weeks. My backyard looked like a well-to-one trench for a while. The contractors, a couple of good old boys named Dave and Ricky, were salt of the earth. "She's a beaut, Mike," Dave had said, wiping sweat from his brow as they fitted the heavy steel door. "Nothing short of a direct hit from a meteor gonna bother you in there. Or maybe Carol, if you plant unapproved petunias." I'd laughed. "That's the plan, Dave. That, or surviving another HOA newsletter about the moral failings of unedged lawns." Ricky chimed in. "Just make sure you got HOA approval for this bad boy. Wouldn't want him trying to tow it." "Oh, I got approval," I'd assured him. "Went through the whole song and dance. Architectural committee, permit from the city, even offered to paint it HOA approved beige number 4. They were thrilled. Well, as thrilled as people who debate the merits of taupe versus ecru can be. It ate up most of my savings, that shelter. But it was worth it for the peace of mind. Or so I thought. The peace lasted approximately 72 hours after the last workman left. It's Saturday morning. The sun's shining with that perfect late spring warmth. Birds are doing their Disney-esque chirping routine. I'm strolling out to my backyard, coffee in hand, ready to admire my new, very expensive, very secure storm shelter. Maybe I'd finally stock it with some Twinkies, a bottle of bourbon, and a copy of War and Peace. You know, the essentials for riding out an F5. I rounded the corner of the house, and my happy little Saturday vibes came to a screeching halt. Wait a minute. I stopped. What's that? Glinting? My heart did a funny little thud. There, wrapped around the gleaming industrial-strength handles of my brand-new shelter door, was a chain. Not just any chain. This was a thick, rusty-looking, heavy-duty log chain, the kind you use to tow a semi-truck out of a ditch. And securing it, a padlock the size of a fist. My coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. No, freaking way. And then I saw it, fluttering slightly in the breeze, attached to the chain with a zip tie. A laminated note. In that distinctive, soul-crushingly cheerful Comic Sans font favored by HOAs everywhere. My hands were shaking a little as I reached for it. I read it aloud, my voice a hoarse whisper of disbelief. Violation notice. The words seemed to pulse. Unauthorized structure modification, access denied per HOA bylaw 7, subsection C, paragraph 2. Carol P. Albright, HOA president. I stared at the words, then at the chain, then back at the words. Unauthorized? Modification? I could feel a vein starting to throb in my temple. I got the city permit. The HOA approved the initial plans. The only modification is this goddamn medieval torture device you've wrapped around my emergency equipment. I touched the chain. It was cold, solid, unyielding. I gave it a furious yank. The shelter didn't budge. The chain didn't budge. My shoulder, however, protested loudly. Okay, I thought, trying to rein in the sudden, hot surge of anger. Deep breaths, Mike. There's got to be a mistake. A hilarious, easily solvable mistake. This is America, right? You can't just chain up someone's storm shelter. That's like putting a boot on a fire truck. But looking at that smug, laminated note, I had a sinking feeling. This wasn't a mistake. This was Carol. And Carol didn't do mistakes. She was a mistake. A mistake of nature. A mistake of suburban planning. A mistake currently intent on making my life a living hell. My fists clenched. Oh, Carol, you magnificent pain in my backside. What fresh idiocy have you unleashed now? I stormed back into the house, the offending note crumpled in my fist. My first instinct was to grab a hacksaw, but then I remembered the sheer beefiness of that chain. I'd be out there half the day, looking like an escaped convict, and she'd probably just come back with a bigger chain and a more infuriating font. No, this required a tactical approach, or at least what passed for tactical when you were seeing red. I dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times, each ring echoing like a tiny hammer blow against my sanity. Carol P. Albright speaking. Her voice oozed through the receiver, smooth and cloying like cheap syrup. Carol, it's Mike Henderson from 121 Oak Street. I tried to keep my voice even, aiming for concerned neighbor rather than guy about to lose his damn mind. Yeah, the one with the newly accessorized storm shelter. Listen, there's clearly been a misunderstanding about this chain situation, so... Mr. Henderson, she replied, and I could practically hear the self-satisfied smirk in her voice. There is no misunderstanding whatsoever. Your structure is in violation of HOA covenants. The bylaws, as I'm sure you've read in the welcome packet I personally delivered, are quite clear. No unapproved modifications post-final approval. Modification? I nearly shouted. then took a breath. Carol, I haven't modified anything. It was installed exactly as per the plans you and your committee of beige enthusiasts signed off on. The only modification here is the one you made with that rusty piece of ironmongery. Ah, she said, and the smugness intensified, if that were even possible. But the finish on the door, Mr. Henderson, the submitted architectural drawings indicated a matte finish, code B452. The installed door appears to possess a semi-gloss finish, closer to B457. A clear deviation, thus unauthorized. The shelter will remain secured until a formal review can be conducted by the Architectural Committee and a remediation plan is approved. I was speechless for a solid 10 seconds. The finish? She'd chained my access to potential life-saving equipment because of the finish on the door. Are you actually kidding me right now, Carol? I finally managed, my voice dangerously low. The sheen? You're jeopardizing my family's safety over the relative reflectivity of a door? Rules are rules, Mr. Henderson, she trilled, clearly enjoying herself. Adherence to aesthetic uniformity is paramount to maintaining property values in Mayberry Heights. Okay, fine, I said, trying another tack. When is this architectural review going to happen? I can get a can of matte paint, spend 5 minutes. The agenda for next month's HOA meeting is unfortunately quite full. She cut me off. We have the annual petunia judging, and a rather heated debate about the acceptable height of garden gnomes. Perhaps the month after. If, of course, your request for review is filed correctly, that would be Form 3B. Request for architectural variance post-installation, submitted in triplicate, notarized, and accompanied by a sworn affidavit from the installer regarding the original paint specifications. Triplicate. Notarized. For a door finish. My eye started to twitch. I could feel it. A tiny, insistent muscle spasm of pure, unadulterated rage. Carol, I said, my voice tight. There's a severe storm warning for Tuesday, possible tornado activity. What am I supposed to do if a twister heads this way? Take shelter under your laminated bylaws? Hope the wind is impressed by your commitment to matte finishes? Perhaps, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You should have considered the potential meteorological ramifications before proceeding with unauthorized work, Mr. Henderson. Diligence is a virtue. Have a lovely weekend. Click. She hung up. She actually, legitimately hung up on me. I stared at my phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a mocking insect. She did not just say meteorological ramifications and then hang up. This wasn't just an overreach. This was a declaration of war. A war waged with chains, bylaws, and an astonishing level of petty vindictiveness. And Carol P. Albright had just made a critical error. She'd forgotten who she was dealing with. A man who now had absolutely nothing to lose except possibly his sanity and his no-claims discount on home insurance. My next hour was a masterclass in bureaucratic futility. I tried the HOA vice president, a Mr. Henderson, no relation, thankfully, whose voicemail informed me he was on a 2-week silent meditation retreat and could not be reached, presumably not even by the sound of impending doom. The treasurer, a Mrs. Periwinkle, sounded about 90, and after I explained the situation for 5 minutes, asked if I was calling about the bake sale. The secretary, a shadowy figure known only as Brenda_HOASEC at AOL.com, responded to my frantic email with a 2-line reply. Carol P. Albright is the designated lead for all enforcement and compliance matters. Please direct all inquiries to her office during prescribed communication hours. Thank you for your cooperation. Cooperation, right. I slammed my laptop shut. It was like trying to punch a cloud. A very smug, very well-organized cloud with its own letterhead. I stalked back out to the backyard, to the chained behemoth that was supposed to be my refuge. The sun glinted off the padlock, mocking me. I kicked the solid concrete base of the shelter. It didn't help, but my toe felt marginally worse, which somehow seemed appropriate. "This isn't just an overreach," I muttered to the unyielding steel. "This is dangerous. This is un-American. And it's incredibly monumentally stupid." I started pacing. What were my options? Call a locksmith? Sure, they could probably get it open for a few $100. And what was to stop Carol from waltzing over with another chain the moment they left? I could end up funding the entire locksmith's benevolent fund by the end of the month. Angle grinder? Cut the chain myself? The thought was tempting. Sparks flying, the shriek of metal on metal. It had a certain visceral appeal, but it would also be noisy as hell. Knowing Carol, she'd have the cops here for disturbing the peace, and probably the fire department for reckless endangerment with an unapproved power tool. She probably had the EPA on speed dial in case my grass clippings were deemed non-organic. Wait it out. File Form 3B in triplicate, get it notarized, and hope the architectural committee, after their exhaustive gnome-height deliberations, might deign to glance at my case in, 6 to 8 weeks? While my family played Russian roulette with the weather? Not a snowball's chance in hell. I sat on my patio steps, head in my hands. I needed a plan. A real plan. Something that said, I am not to be trifled with, especially when it comes to matters of basic safety and exorbitant expenditure. My gaze drifted across my yard, then to my neighbor's meticulously manicured lawn, definitely HOA-approved fescue. Then further down the street where old Mr. Abernathy was, yet again, trying to start his ancient lawnmower with a series of violent tugs and even more violent curses. And then it hit me. It wasn't a fully formed idea, more like a spark. A crazy, beautiful, possibly felonious spark. I started thinking about all those action movies. What would Bronson do? Too many potential legal complications? Stallone? He'd probably try to punch the chain off. I value my knuckles. Schwarzenegger? He'd make a witty quip, then rip the door off its hinges. Again, property damage I'd have to pay for. No, this wasn't about finesse. It wasn't about subtlety. This was about sending a message. A very large, very yellow, very loud message. A slow grin spread across my face. It probably looked a little unhinged. I felt a little unhinged. I scrambled back inside, straight to my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Heavy equipment rental near me. The search results popped up. And there it was, nestled amongst ads for stump grinders and cement mixers, reliable rentals, bulldozers, excavators, and your partner in earth-moving endeavors. Partner in earth-moving endeavors. I liked the sound of that. I clicked the link. My heart was pounding now, a mixture of trepidation and giddy, reckless excitement. This was either the stupidest idea I'd ever had or the most brilliantly effective. Possibly both. I found their number and dialed. "Reliable Rentals, Jimmy speaking," a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah, hi, Jimmy," I said, trying to sound like a man who rented bulldozers every Tuesday. "I need to rent a bulldozer. Smallest one you've got that can still, nudge things decisively." There was a pause. Then Jimmy chuckled, a sound like rocks in a cement mixer. "Nudge things, huh? What kind of things we talking about, buddy? Not like, say, an illegally parked car belonging to your mother-in-law, are we?" "Oh, nothing like that," I said, aiming for breezy. "Just some stubborn landscaping. Overgrown roots. Definitely not prize-winning petunias, or any kind of decorative yet highly infuriating chain around a storm shelter." Jimmy laughed out loud this time. "Right. Look, as long as you got a valid driver's license, a regular one will do for the little guys, and a credit card that doesn't scream, impulse decision I'll regret Monday morning." I can have a Caterpillar D3K compact model out to you this afternoon. You know how to operate one of these things, right? They don't exactly parallel park themselves, and they're not keen on taking directions from a Siri. The D3K. It sounded appropriately menacing. License, check. Credit card, check. I confirmed. Operation? Let's just say I'm a fast learner with an extremely strong motivation. And I've seen a YouTube tutorial, 2, actually. One was even narrated by a guy who sounded vaguely like Sam Elliott. Famous last words, pal, Jimmy chortled. All right, Daredevil. It's your deposit. Delivery in 2 hours. Name's Henderson, right? Try not to make the 6 o'clock news, okay? Or if you do, at least mention reliable rentals. I hung up, a strange buzzing in my ears. It was done. A Caterpillar D3K was heading my way. I leaned back in my chair, a wild, slightly hysterical laugh bubbling up. No turning back now, Mikey, I said to the empty room. This is either going to be the most satisfying afternoon of my entire adult life, or the beginning of a very colorful and well-documented criminal record. I spent the next hour and 55 minutes in a state of high anxiety and even higher anticipation. I re-watched the YouTube Bulldozer tutorials. I paced. I made sure my phone was fully charged, anticipating the need to film Carol's reaction for posterity, or possibly as evidence for my inevitable insanity plea. The rumble started subtly, a distant vibration that grew steadily into a ground-shaking tremor. I peeked through the blinds. There it was, a massive flatbed truck, inching its way down idyllic Oak Street. Neighbors, alerted by the seismic disturbance, were already appearing on their porches, their faces a mixture of curiosity and alarm. Old Mrs. Henderson, the one who thought I was calling about the bake sale, looked like she might faint. The truck hissed to a stop in front of my house, and the main event began. The unloading of one Caterpillar D3K compact track loader. It might have been compact by Bulldozer standards, but in the middle of a suburban street lined with neatly trimmed lawns and bird baths, it looked like Godzilla had decided to take up gardening. The delivery driver, a stoic man named Sal, who looked like he'd wrestled bears for a living and won, expertly maneuvered the yellow beast off the flatbed. He gave me a once-over, then jerked a thumb towards the cab. Keys are in it. Livers do what the stickers say. Don't tip it on a slope, and try not to run over any small pets or particularly vocal HOA presidents. He winked, a slow, deliberate facial movement. Call us when you're done with your landscaping. Will do, Sal. Thanks. I swallowed, suddenly feeling the immense weight of my decision, both literally and figuratively. I climbed into the cab. The seat was surprisingly comfortable. The view, however, was less king of the road and more oh crap. What have I gotten myself into? It smelled of diesel, hydraulic fluid, and the faint, lingering scent of righteous indignation. I took a deep breath. Okay, Mike, I muttered, gripping the controls. YouTube University, don't fail me now. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a throaty bellow that rattled the windows of my own house. Down the street, a chorus of car alarms erupted in a startled symphony. This was it. I tentatively pushed a lever. The bulldozer lurched forward an inch. Success! I pulled another. It lurched backward. Okay, steeper learning curve than anticipated. After a few more jerky experiments that probably gave my watching neighbors whiplash, I managed to get the D3K pointed in roughly the right direction. My backyard, where my chained princess of a storm shelter awaited its liberation. The journey was slow, awkward, and incredibly, earth-shatteringly noisy. Every window I passed had a face in it. Some were horrified, their hands clasped to their mouths. Young Timmy from next door was jumping up and down, pointing excitedly. His mom looked like she was already dialing Child Protective Services. But then there were others. Mr. Grumbles from across the street, who'd once received a violation for the unapproved exuberance of his marigolds, gave me a slow, deliberate thumbs up. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been forced to repaint her front door 3 times to find the correct shade of off-beige, actually blew me a kiss. I was becoming a suburban folk hero, one clanking, diesel-belching track at a time. I could see Carol's house now. Her perfectly symmetrical HOA-approved curtains twitched violently. I imagined her inside, face contorted, probably already on the phone to the National Guard. Finally, with a last, triumphant, and slightly off-course lurch, I maneuvered the D3K into position. There it was, my storm shelter looking forlorn and captive. The bulldozer's blade was aimed directly at the offending chain. The engine idled, a deep, hungry rumble. Showtime. Just as I was about to adjust the blade height, Carol P. Albright burst from her front door like a beige-clad bat out of hell. Her face was a mask of fury. Her power-walking outfit stretched taut over a frame vibrating with indignation. She had her phone clamped to her ear, already screeching. "Henderson!" Her voice, even over the bulldozer's growl, was impressively shrill. It could strip paint. "What in God's name do you think you are doing? I am calling the police. This is vandalism. This is suburban terrorism." I leaned out of the cab, cupping my hand to my ear with exaggerated politeness. "Sorry, Carol. Can't quite hear you over the sound of imminent justice and this very large engine." I cut the engine slightly, just enough for my next words to carry. "Carol," I yelled, my voice calm but carrying the distinct promise of mechanical mayhem. "You have exactly 2 minutes to get the key from wherever you keep your collection of shrunken souls and unlock my storm shelter. After that," I paused for dramatic effect, "I'm making a new entrance." Her jaw dropped. For a second, she was actually speechless. It was a beautiful, fleeting moment. You wouldn't dare," she finally stammered, her voice cracking. "This is HOA property, adjacent. I have bylaws, I have regulations. I have a very aggressive lawyer on retainer. And I announced, patting the side of the bulldozer, have a Caterpillar D3K with a full tank of gas and a very short temper. Your move, Carol, tick-tock." I gave the engine a short, sharp rev. The D3K shuddered, and a puff of black smoke billowed out, momentarily obscuring her outraged face. A small but enthusiastic crowd of neighbors had gathered at what they deemed a safe distance. Phones were definitely out, little red recording lights blinking like malevolent fireflies. I could hear snippets of excited chatter. "He's actually doing it! Go, Mike, go!" Then, a familiar voice boomed out. It was Dave, the storm shelter contractor, who must have heard the commotion from a few streets over. "Give her the beans, Mike. For all of us who've ever had to deal with Bylaw 7, subsection C." I grinned. It felt good to have backup, even if my backup was currently armed with nothing more than a smartphone and a deep-seated resentment of architectural committees. "Okay," I thought, taking another deep breath. "This is it. Please don't let me accidentally demolish my own house, or worse, her prize-winning azaleas that encroached 3 inches onto my property line. Okay, maybe the azaleas wouldn't be worse. Just collateral satisfaction, and the next 2 minutes seemed stretched longer than a Senate filibuster." I sat there in the cab, one hand on the lever that controlled the blade, the other tapping impatiently on the window. I glanced at my watch. 1 minute and 47 seconds to go. Carol was apoplectic. She was pacing back and forth on her perfect lawn, phone still glued to her ear, gesticulating wildly towards me, the bulldozer, and presumably the heavens, decrying the injustice of it all. "Yes, officer," I could hear her screeching. "A bulldozer, a yellow one, with tracks. He's threatening to deshrub my prize-winning rhododendrons. They're an heirloom varietal. And the shelter. He's going to destroy everything. Send everyone. Send the SWAT team. Send a strongly worded letter on official police stationery. I rolled my eyes. Rhododendrons? Lady, your priorities are a botanical marvel of misplaced concern. 1 minute down. The crowd of neighbors had swelled. Someone had even brought popcorn. Popcorn? I made a mental note to thank them later. I could see a flicker of something in Carol's eyes. Was it uncertainty? Fear? Or was she just trying to calculate the replacement cost of her potentially doomed shrubbery? Is she actually considering it? I muttered to myself, watching her. Or is she just trying to stall until the cavalry arrives in their black and whites? Come on, Carol. Be reasonable for once in your over-starched, beige-loving life. 30 seconds. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tightened my grip on the lever. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return, the apex of suburban standoffs. Carol was still shrieking into her phone. He's going to do it! He's a madman! A loose cannon with access to heavy machinery. My property values are plummeting as we speak. Then, directly at me, her voice hitting a new, previously undiscovered octave of outrage. Don't you touch that shelter, Henderson. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, and the HOA's lawyer, and my gardening club's lawyer. We have a very influential newsletter. 10 seconds, Carol, I bellowed back, my voice surprisingly steady. Last chance to avoid re-landscaping via industrial equipment. The crowd hushed. Even the popcorn munching paused. The air crackled with anticipation. 3! I counted down loud and clear. 2! Carol's eyes widened. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. 1! This was it. With a surprisingly steady hand, I engaged the lever. The bulldozer's massive blade lowered slowly, ominously. I wasn't aiming for the shelter door itself. That would be counterproductive and expensive. No, my target was smaller, more symbolic. Instead of a brute force assault, I went for surgical precision, or at least what passes for surgical precision when you're operating several tons of growling steel after a 2-hour YouTube crash course. I nudged the blade forward ever so gently, right up to the point where the offensive chain was looped around one of the sturdy mounting bolts. Then, with a slight increase in pressure and a satisfying metallic twang, the thick, rusty chain snapped like a dry twig. A collective gasp went up from the crowd, followed by a ragged, disbelieving cheer. Carol, however, let out a shriek that could have shattered glass, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and thwarted authoritarianism. My chain! My HOA-sanctioned restraint! I wasn't done. For an encore, I carefully maneuvered the corner of the blade under the laminated violation notice still zip-tied to the remaining piece of chain. With a delicate, for a bulldozer, flick, I scooped it up, reversed a foot, and then brought the heavy track down squarely on Carol P. Albright's official proclamation. The crunch of plastic and paper under tons of steel was music to my ears. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, broken only by Carol's continued, slightly more subdued, whimpering, and the excited chatter of my neighbors. I climbed down from the cab, trying to look nonchalant, like I did this sort of thing every Saturday. I walked over to the storm shelter, kicked the 2 pieces of broken chain aside with theatrical disdain, and pulled open the heavy steel door. It swung smoothly, a beautiful sight. Ah, freedom, I announced to the assembled onlookers, taking a deep, satisfying breath of air that no longer smelled of Carol's petty tyranny. And the delightful, unchained aroma of approved beige number 4. Okay, I'll admit it. Expertly and surgically might have been stretching the truth a tad. I might have also slightly scraped the paint on one of the shelter handles. And, if I'm being perfectly honest, one of Carol's less offensive garden gnomes, A rather smug-looking fellow holding a fishing rod might have inadvertently ended up under the tracks during my triumphant reverse maneuver. Collateral damage. Details, details. But the chain? The chain was history. The wail of police sirens cut through the post-carnage euphoria. Predictable. Carol probably had them on speed dial right next to her garden club president. 2 squad cars, lights flashing, pulled up to the curb with a screech of tires. Officer Miller, a man whose face was a road map of seen-it-all weariness, and Officer Davis, younger, greener, and visibly struggling to maintain a professional poker face, stepped out. "All right, folks, show's over, nothing to see here," Officer Miller announced, though his eyes were definitely taking in the bulldozer, the broken chain, the traumatized gnome, and Carol, who was now dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief while pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Ma'am, you want to start?" he asked Carol, his voice heavy with the resignation of a man who knew his Saturday was about to get complicated. "Officer, thank heavens!" Carol wailed, rushing towards them. "Arrest this hooligan, this menace. He destroyed HOA property. He threatened me. He came at me with that thing." She gestured dramatically at the bulldozer, which sat silently, looking rather pleased with itself. I stepped forward, holding up the 2 pieces of broken chain in one hand and Carol's crumpled, track-marked violation notice in the other. "Officer Mike Henderson, I own this property, and that storm shelter, which until about 5 minutes ago was illegally chained shut by Miss Albright here, preventing access to vital safety equipment during a pending severe storm warning." Officer Davis took the note, his lips twitching. Officer Miller peered at it over his shoulder. "Unauthorized structure modification. Door finish." Miller read aloud, then looked up, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, let me get this straight. You chained this man's storm shelter shut because of the paint color?" Carol drew herself up, her voice regaining some of its shrill authority. "It's the principle, officer. The bylaws. We must maintain aesthetic cohesion. Without rules, there is only chaos and poorly finished doors. The principle of her potentially getting me, my wife, and my hypothetical dog killed by a rogue F5 Twister officer," I interjected calmly. Several neighbors murmured their agreement, nodding vigorously. "There is a tornado watch in effect, officer," Dave the contractor called out. "Been on the news all morning." Officer Miller sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the suburban disputes he'd ever had to mediate. "Sir," he said, turning to me, "driving a bulldozer, even a compact one, in a residential area and using it to, shall we say, alter existing hardware isn't exactly standard procedure for bylaw disputes. You could be looking at a municipal citation for disturbing the peace, maybe reckless operation of heavy machinery if we wanted to be picky." I felt a small knot in my stomach. Here it comes, I thought. The price of sweet, sweet, chain-snapping freedom. "However," Officer Miller continued, turning his steely gaze back to Carol, who puffed up expectantly. "Ma'am, chaining up essential emergency equipment like a storm shelter, especially with a known weather advisory in place, that's a significantly more serious issue. That could, in fact, be construed as reckless endangerment, and interfering with a homeowner's access to their private property with no immediate, verifiable safety justification from your end beyond a door finish dispute is a civil matter you are overwhelmingly likely to lose. Expensively." Carol sputtered. Her face went from indignant pink to a rather alarming shade of mottled purple. But the architectural committee, the integrity of the beige." Officer Davis, who had been remarkably quiet up to this point, finally spoke, his voice laced with a barely concealed amusement. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I think the architectural committee, and indeed the entire neighborhood, would prefer homeowners be alive to repaint their doors to the correct beige specification, rather than potentially deceased under a door of a slightly incorrect sheen. It was, I had to admit, a beautifully articulated point. The upshot was this. Carol P. Albright was given a very stern, very public warning about abuse of HOA power, potential liability, and the inadvisability of chaining things that could save people's lives. I got a lecture on appropriate dispute resolution techniques. Apparently, bulldozers are low on that list. And a promise that a small municipal citation for unconventional gardening and hardware removal techniques might be forthcoming. But no arrests, no major charges. Just a story that would, I suspected, be told at Mayberry Heights block parties for years to come. As Officer Miller was getting back into his car, he paused. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice low. "Next time maybe try a strongly worded letter to the editor first, huh? My ulcer can't take too many more Saturdays like this." He almost cracked a smile. "Duly noted, officer," I said, trying to look suitably chastened. "But between you and me, this was way more effective, and if I'm honest, a heck of a lot more satisfying." He just shook his head and drove off, leaving behind a slightly dazed but significantly more liberated Oak Street. The news of the Battle of Oak Street, as it quickly became known, or sometimes the Great Beige Rebellion, or my personal favorite, Mike versus the Machine, spread like wildfire, or more accurately, like gossip over lukewarm coffee at the community pool. An emergency HOA meeting was called. I attended, of course, sat right in the front row. The room was packed, not with the usual sleepy-eyed retirees, but with a fired-up crowd of homeowners, many of whom had their own tales of Carol-induced woe. It was like a support group, but with more PowerPoint presentations detailing bylaw abuse. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up and tearfully recounted her 3-door repaint saga. Mr. Grumbles, emboldened, delivered a passionate monologue about the tyranny of marigold suppression. It was beautiful. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. A quiet woman from down the cul-de-sac, someone I'd only ever seen walking a tiny, yappy dog, stood up. "Carol's had it out for that house for years," she announced. "Ever since the previous owner, Mr. Peterson, beat her in the most symmetrically pruned shrubbery contest 3 years running. She said he used unconventional fertilizers. The storm shelter was just her newest excuse to target that lot." A collective gasp went through the room. It all made a twisted kind of sense. This wasn't about beige or bylaws, or even the structural integrity of my door finish. This was about shrubs and a deep, dark, suburban horticultural vendetta. The sheer glorious absurdity of it all was breathtaking. Carol tried to defend herself, of course. Something about the sanctity of pruning standards and Mr. Peterson's suspiciously vibrant azaleas. But the tide had turned. By the end of the meeting, Carol P. Albright had been encouraged to take an extended sabbatical from her presidential duties, which in HOA speak meant she was out. A small, but profoundly satisfying victory for common sense and slightly off-beige storm shelter doors everywhere. The HOA even issued a hastily drafted clarification, stating that emergency safety equipment, while encouraged to be aesthetically pleasing, was not subject to bylaws that might compromise its immediate accessibility. No kidding. I did have to attend a remarkably civil mediation with Carol, brokered by a very patient and probably very expensive lawyer the HOA hired. I agreed to pay for the replacement of the one flattened garden gnome. Norman, apparently, had sentimental value, and to be more mindful of where I parked heavy construction equipment in the future. Carol agreed to, well, mostly she just glared at me and muttered about the decline of Western civilization. Life on Oak Street settled into a new normal. I was Bulldozer Mike. Neighbors greeted me with knowing smiles and the occasional thumbs up. Dave, the contractor, dropped off a six-pack with a note that just said, "You magnificent bastard." Mrs. Rodriguez baked me a pie. Rebellion Raspberry, she called it. It was delicious. The actual storm that had been predicted for that Tuesday? It fizzled out into a light drizzle and a bit of a breeze. Figures. All that drama. All that diesel. And not even a decent gust of wind to justify it. The irony was not lost on me. So now, when the sky looks a little green, I head out to my beautifully unchained, slightly scraped but perfectly functional storm shelter. I've stocked it well. Twinkies, check. Bourbon, check. A copy of War and Peace. Still haven't cracked it. Check. And propped up in the corner, a small framed 8x10 glossy of a Caterpillar D3K bulldozer. Just as a reminder. Carol still power walks past my house every morning, her new, even smaller, even yappier dog straining at its leash, making a point of barking furiously at my property line. I just wave. So yeah, I became Bulldozer Mike. Got a very minor citation from the city for unconventional landscaping, a bill for one dearly departed Norman the garden gnome, and a lifetime of entertaining dinner party stories. Was it worth it? Every single solitary penny of that bulldozer rental fee. Because sometimes, folks, you just gotta nudge things decisively, especially when things are wrapped in bureaucratic red tape, horticultural vendettas, and a really, really annoying chain. And sometimes, the only way to fight crazy is with a little bit of crazy yourself. Preferably yellow and on tracks.